All right, to get us thinking about the topic of love for the last talk on Sex and the City, got a couple of quotes for you. Just where the name is significant, I'll give you the name of the quote. Here's one that, these are just ones that caught my eye. They're not particularly profound or deep or intellectual. They're just ones as I went to Brainy quote, caught my eye. A flower cannot blossom without sunshine, and a man cannot live without love. This one, cheeky one. To love oneself is the beginning of a lifelong romance. Oscar Wilde. Good old Bill Shakespeare. Love is merely a madness, and I tell you, deserves as well as a dark house and a whip as madmen do. And the reason why they are not so punished and cured is that the lunacy is so ordinary, and that the whippers are in love too. He just likens it to a madness. Love is a game that two can play, and both win. Eva Gabor. She's a film actress, right? Yeah. Here's one a little deeper. Love is an act of endless forgiveness, a tender look which becomes a habit. I quite liked that one. And this is from a man who read in the newspaper he's got a son with significant disabilities, and he wrote this. Love is the most humdrum thing in life, the only thing that matters, the thing that is forever beyond the reach of human imagination. And he's talking about something his child entered into his world with significant disabilities, and he's kind of weighing up, love is expressed in just the really ordinary acts that he does every day for this child, and yet it's the only thing that matters. And yet also, how do you capture what love really is that drives him for such sacrifices for his own child? Well, without more ado, I'll hand over to David, who's going to speak on Song of Songs on the topic of love. Over to you, mate.
Well, we've more or less looked over these last, is it 4 weeks we've been doing this? Looked at nearly the whole of the Song of Solomon. We're just more or less, we're skipping over most of chapter 6 and coming to the last 2 chapters just because we want to fit it into the 4 talks. But let me start with these quotes, some more quotes, even more trite perhaps than the ones that we've just heard, some of them. Alan, age 10, on the secret of marriage. You've got to find somebody who likes the same stuff. If you like sport, she should like it, that you like sport, and should keep the chips and dip coming. Laurie, aged 8, when asked what her mum and dad had in common, said they both don't want any more kids. Derek, aged 8, asked how can you tell if 2 people are married, said you might have to guess based on whether they seem to be yelling at the same kids. Pam, aged 7, was asked when is it okay to kiss someone? When they're rich, she said. Anita, aged 9, is it better to be single or married? It's better for girls to be single, not for boys. Boys need someone to clean up after them. And Ricky, aged 10, was asked how would you make a marriage work? He said, tell your wife she looks pretty even if she looks like a truck. Well, yes, out of the mouths of babes. And but you and I are not likely to take advice on love and marriage from a bunch of pre-pubescent school kids. So where are we going to turn to? Who are we going to listen to? Oprah? Not opera, Oprah. Dr. Phil, Cosmopolitan magazine. What wisdom are we going to live by? That's why we're doing this series, really. It's part of the wisdom literature of the Old Testament. Solomon is widely regarded as one of the wisest men who ever lived. The wisdom of Solomon is legendary. And there are 3 books in the Bible in the Old Testament attributed to Solomon. There's the book of Proverbs, the book of Ecclesiastes, and the Song of Solomon. And we've been looking at this love poem, the Song of Solomon. If the Bible was subject to censorship, then the Song of Solomon would probably be rated M, for mature audiences only. It contains adult themes, nudity, strong sex scenes, but I'm pleased to say no coarse language. It's a book about sex and marriage. God isn't coy about sex. It was his idea, it was his invention, and it was his gift to the human race. So as we come to these last two chapters, chapters 7 and 8, there are three things that I want you to see. There's a dance described for us. That's where we'll start, in chapter 7. And then in chapter 8, we have the passage that Glenn read for us. We have a definition of love. And then towards the end of chapter 8, it's the final curtain in the drama, if you like, and all the main characters come on stage. It's the curtain call, if you like. So there are three things. There's a dance, there's a definition, and there's the end of the drama. So first of all, it is a dance. We missed off the bit that tells you that. It's at the end of chapter 6, so I'll just read the last verse of chapter 6. Her friends are inviting her to dance. They're calling her back to dance. Come back, O Shulamite. This is verse 13 of chapter 6. It's just before the start of what you've got in front of you. Come back, O Shulamite. Come back, that we may gaze on you. Why would you gaze on the Shulamite, she says, as on the dance of Mahanaim? So they're really saying to her, give us a twirl. Come on. They're inviting her to dance. And they've got a specific, a particular dance in mind. It's the dance of Mahanaim, literally the dance of the two camps. It's, if you can picture, two armies in formation, if you like, battling it out, attacking and defending, advancing and retreating. It's that you can picture the sort of dance that it is. It's poetry in motion. It's like watching whales playing rugby. It's that kind of a dance. And as she dances, he's mesmerized. You can actually, the Hebrew there's movement in the Hebrew, and if you know Hebrew, which I really don't, I've forgotten all my Hebrew, but it's clear that there's movement here, and you can see it even as we read through these verses. You can almost watch her dancing, can't you? Look at how chapter 7 opens there. How beautiful your sandaled feet, O prince's daughter, she says there. He says to her. He's describing her from the feet up, as you would if you were watching someone dance. She's dancing. And he admires her figure as she dances. Graceful legs, curved thighs, rounded navel, cuddly breasts, shapely waist. I know it says there in verse 2 that her waist is like a mound of wheat. That doesn't sound very flattering, but it's more like a sheaf than a sack of wheat. So you can imagine the shape of a sheaf of wheat. It's that shape. And then he spoils it all, of course, doesn't he, in verses 4 and 5? He says, you've got a nose like the Tower of Lebanon and a head like Mount Carmel. So she's Barbara Streisand. But really, he's not talking so much about her looks at this point. It's the movement, it's the dance that he's watching, and it's her bearing that he's describing as she dances, as she twists and turns. She's turning him on. How do I know that? Well, just look at verses 6 to 9. How beautiful you are, how pleasing, my love, with your delights. Your stature is like that of the palm, your breasts like clusters of fruit. I said, I will climb the palm tree. I'll take hold of its fruit. That's about as erotic as the poem gets. May your breasts be like clusters of grapes on the vine, the fragrance of your breath like apples, and your mouth like the best wine. He wants to climb the palm tree. And you can imagine what that is. a metaphor for. And his desire, that desire is reciprocated in verses 9 to 13 when she replies. They're kind of, dare I say it, I don't know if I should say it, they're kind of sexting each other in the nicest possible way. This isn't dirty talk, but it is erotic. And they're kind of preparing themselves to enjoy each other. And they're wanting to make out. They're wanting to make love. There's no doubt about that. This is, as I say, the most erotic part of the song. All the imagery here is sort of sexually charged. Mandrakes, for example, in verse 13, were thought to be an aphrodisiac. Pharmacologically speaking, mandrakes are not aphrodisiacs. They're more likely to send you to sleep than arouse you. But this man is a poet, not a pharmacist. The only chemistry he's interested in is the sexual chemistry between the two of them. And it's palpable, isn't it? Look at verses 1 to 4 of chapter 8. Haven't you seen, young lovers clinging to each other in the street? It's so embarrassing, isn't it? Wrapped around each other, at the bus stop, kissing each other. Well, she wants to do that. But it's culturally unacceptable, inappropriate for a couple to embrace each other in public. And so she says there, you notice in chapter 8, if only you were to me like a brother who was nursed at my mother's breasts, then if I found you outside, I would kiss you and no one would despise me. His left arm is under my head, his right arm embraces me. They just can't get enough of each other. And then she says, again to her friends there in verse 4 of chapter 8, daughters of Jerusalem, I charge you, do not arouse or awaken love until it so desires. That's the chorus line. The daughters of Jerusalem are the chorus girls who keep sort of dancing into the song. And that's the line that keeps getting repeated. Be patient, wait for the right time and the right person. And when God brings you together in the covenant of marriage, because that's what the middle two chapters were all about, go for it. There's a lovely story told about Louis Armstrong, the famous jazz musician. Back in 1949, Pope Pius XII visited America and met Louis Armstrong. I think Louis Armstrong would have been about 50 at the time. And the Pope said to him, do you and Mrs. Armstrong have any children? No, said Louis Armstrong. No, Holy Father. But we're having a lot of fun trying. I don't think that was the answer that the Pope was expecting necessarily, but it is an entirely appropriate answer, isn't it? It is a thoroughly biblical answer. Good on you, Louis Armstrong. Don't know if he knew his Bible, but that's a thoroughly biblical thing to say, isn't it? If God hasn't blessed you with children, you are nonetheless married. If sex is not just for the procreation of the species, it's fun. It is a good gift from God to be enjoyed within the covenant of marriage. That's what this dance is teaching us. That's what the imagery here is really showing us. It's good, clean fun in the proper context at the proper time. So let's move then from the dance to the definition of love that you have in verses 5 to 7 of chapter 8. Just over the page there on the sheet. See, the world has many definitions of love. We've heard a few already this afternoon. Some funny, some sad, some coy, some bizarre, some true, some silly, some sentimental. Love is a warm puppy, according to Charlie Brown. Love, if you go into the card shops on Valentine's Day, love means sharing the chores. Love is never having to say you're sorry. Really? What is this thing called love? That's what we're meant to ask ourselves when we listen to this poetry, when we read it. What is this thing called love? We've had a description of it, but now she's going to actually give us a definition, and it's a beautiful biblical definition of what love is. But first, the daughters of Jerusalem sort of frame it for us, don't they? in verse 5 of chapter 8. They get out their digital cameras and they capture the scene for us. Who is this coming up from the wilderness, leaning on her beloved? So there they are, you can see them, arm in arm, leaning on each other, the picture of love and happiness. What is this? What is this thing called love? She's found love, and she's going to define it for us. And she says, I think, 5 things. Not sure about the first, whether it's actually coming out of this, I'm not sure. But there are 5 things, and I'm Welsh, and so all my points begin with the same letter. And there are 5 things to this definition, all beginning with the letter P. And I think the first thing is this: it's painful. I may or may not be reading this right, but you notice in verse 5, the second half of verse 5, she compares it to giving birth. That's almost impossible, I think. We're all men. No, we're not all men. Apologies to the lady present. But it's almost impossible for us to appreciate just how painful that is. Bill Cosby once tried to explain it like this. He says it's like taking your lower lip and pulling it over your head. Doesn't it? I haven't summoned up the courage to ask my wife if that's an accurate description, but it's they call it labour because it's hard work. It is painful, and there's a sense in which love is like that. It's like labouring to give birth. Well, you know, when I'm doing premarital counselling with couples that come, not that, you know, there's a kind of tool that I use, and there's a way of actually screening out the kind of romantic idealism from the answers that you get, and because a lot of people come and they think, you know, well, yeah, as long as you're in love with each other, there are all the difficulties that, you know, we get through all those things. We just sail through. And the first thing I have to do every time is say, look, no, love is hard work. It's difficult. It's you've got to work at this. The romance will be there, but it won't be there forever. Real love needs to be worked at. C.S. Lewis, I think, says it well, as he says everything well, doesn't he, C.S. Lewis? To love at all, he says, is to be vulnerable. Love anything, and your heart will be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give it to no one, not even an animal. Wrap it carefully round with hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safe in the casket or coffin of your own selfishness. But in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will